August 17th, 2025. In the silent black sky above the Pacific, 3 Chinese intercontinental ballistic missiles ripped upward from deep within the mainland, each traveling at 15,000 miles per hour, 20 times the speed of sound. Their destination, the pride of the United States Navy, the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group. Each missile weighed more than 80 tons, cost over $110 million, and carried one purpose: only to destroy America's most powerful symbol of strength. If they succeeded, it would be the deadliest single attack on US forces since Pearl Harbor. Aboard the Reagan, radar operators were jolted awake by alarms that screamed across the ship. In an instant, the crew knew what they were facing. 12 minutes. That was all the time left between life and death. The Aegis combat system roared to life. THAAD interceptors stood ready. At 180 miles out, the first warhead was vaporized in a blinding flash. Seconds later, the second missile disintegrated at 70 miles altitude, raining molten fragments harmlessly into the Pacific. But then came the third missile, faster, lower, masked by electronic countermeasures, the one designed to break through America's shield. An SM-6 interceptor was launched in desperation. The window narrowed to seconds. The missile connected, detonating the warhead, but far too close. The explosion slammed into the starboard side of the Ronald Reagan with the fury of 10 tons of TNT. The hull screamed as steel bent and tore. A truck-sized hole gaped open. On the flight deck, a $70 million FA-18 Super Hornet was ripped from its landing gear and hurled into the ocean. Below deck, 7 sailors were critically injured bodies broken against steel bulkheads. For the first time since World War II, an American carrier had been wounded by a foreign power. To those old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, the echoes were chilling. This was no drill. This was the beginning of a nightmare. Yet one truth stood out: America's defenses had stopped the unthinkable. 2 missiles destroyed, 1 neutralized just feet from total annihilation. Thousands of sailors saved. But the message was clear: Beijing was done bluffing. At 3:01 a.m., Rear Admiral Thomas Caldwell demanded a secure line to the Pentagon. His words were cold, but the fury behind them thundered. This wasn't intimidation. This was an assassination attempt on 5,000 Americans. The numbers told a terrifying truth. Had just one of those ICBMs slipped through the explosion, equivalent to 1.5 million pounds of TNT, would have annihilated the Reagan, sinking a $13 billion warship in seconds and killing thousands. In Washington, President Donald Trump was briefed within 5 minutes. Advisors urged caution, warning that retaliation could ignite nuclear war. But time was slipping away. America's enemies were watching. Allies were holding their breath. The free world demanded an answer. At 3:08 a.m., Trump gave the order with 4 words that would echo through history: strike back. Full force. Within minutes, B-2 stealth bombers cut through the night sky. Tomahawk missiles screamed from submarines. A precision strike obliterated 20% of China's nuclear arsenal before dawn. But Beijing was not finished. In retaliation, they launched 20 ICBMs toward American cities. The world braced for Armageddon. And aboard the shattered Ronald Reagan, sailors stood among fire and twisted steel, knowing they had just survived the first shots of a war that could end civilization itself. The question is this: would the United States escalate with weapons of mass destruction, or attempt to negotiate peace while the world stood seconds from annihilation? make it count. That was the order. And America's retaliation plan began like a massive war machine, moving with terrifying cold precision. First, the EA-18G Growlers roared off the carrier deck wings, trembling under emergency red lights. Their mission to unleash an electronic storm powerful enough to blind China's entire radar network across a 200-mile corridor. Within minutes, the eastern Chinese air defense grid was drowning in chaos. Radar screens flickered, then went black. One of the most powerful air defense empires on Earth had been blinded in an instant. Moments later, 4 B-2 Spirits, each worth $2.2 billion, lifted into the night. With radar signatures no larger than a bird, they slipped through the darkness like phantoms. Hidden inside their bomb bays were the monsters' GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, each weighing 30,000 pounds, capable of burrowing through 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. Each carried the force of 11 tons of TNT, enough to wipe an entire neighborhood off the map with a single strike. To sustain the operation, 4 KC-135 tankers stood ready to keep the Spirits airborne for another 12 hours. Overhead, a vast shield assembled 20 F-35 Lightning II fighters worth $1.6 billion combined, sweeping the skies, protecting the entire formation. Beneath the waves, 15 Tomahawk cruise missiles blasted from their launchers, skimming the ocean at 550 miles per hour, hugging low to avoid detection. Every clock read 3:22 a.m. The order was signed. The carrier deck shook violently as the first wave tore into the night. A campaign costing over $10 billion in steel and technology had been set in motion, focused on one single purpose: to erase the bases that dared fire on the US Navy. On the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan sailors stood silent eyes locked on the streaks of light vanishing into the black horizon. Fear was gone. Only resolve remained. China had struck first. Now America would respond with a storm of annihilation. 3:30 a.m., the first Growlers crossed the invisible line. A wave of electronic interference rolled across radar stations from Fujian to Guangdong. Chinese screens flashed, then went dead. The Great Wall of Air Defense was shrouded in darkness. 3:47 a.m. 4 Phantom B-2 Spirits sliced through the night like blades through silk. They flew so quietly, an entire nation remained unaware of their approach. 4:02 a.m. The first bombs dropped. Target the massive missile production complex at Qingdao, sprawling underground like 40 football fields. The earth convulsed as the GBU-57s punched through layers of concrete and detonated deep below, unleashing a shockwave equal to a 5.4 magnitude earthquake. The entire facility collapsed in on itself. Seconds later, Tomahawks screamed overhead, slamming into the ruins, turning them into an inferno. Witnesses described the explosion as a fireball half a mile wide, ripping the night apart. The second B-2 struck a massive fuel depot in Fujian. Over 5 million gallons of volatile liquid erupted in a chain reaction so fierce the fireball shot 2,000 feet into the air, visible from Taiwan's western shore. The third and fourth Spirits targeted a hardened command center outside Shanghai. Built to withstand nuclear strikes, it crumbled under the weight of 60,000 pounds of steel and explosives raining down in less than 30 seconds. Concrete towers collapsed. 10 senior Chinese officers, including 2 major generals, were killed instantly. As the smoke began to clear, the toll was undeniable. 300 Chinese soldiers dead, 200 wounded, 3 of Beijing's most strategic bases reduced to rubble. The once feared missile brigades threatening the Pacific lay paralyzed in under an hour. On US Navy radar, the red blips that once marked danger vanished. Mainland China burned in 3 separate infernos. Aboard, the Reagan sailors stood frozen, realizing they were witnessing history in real time. In less than 60 minutes, America had dropped over 200,000 pounds of explosives, the conventional firepower equivalent of 20 Hiroshima bombs, without losing a single aircraft. The message sent to Beijing was sharp, cold, and unmistakable. Strike us and the price you pay will be unthinkable. What do you think? Will the United States unleash its full arsenal, or will diplomacy prevail before the world burns? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to see how this terrifying conflict unfolds, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because the next chapter of this story will change everything you thought you knew about modern warfare.